Here, if you want it, is the enemy in absolutely plain view. All the things I write about in my book, intolerance, racism, stupidity, religious cultism, the refusal to think, the refusal to allow skepticism, the denial of reason. There it all is, perfectly embodied and symbolized with its consequences, and its means are its ends. In other words, civilian murder, filthy, murderous attack on civil society is inscribed in the means and the ends. The means are dead bodies. They use civilians to kill civilians, if you follow me, if you can imagine the conditions on those planes in the last minutes. Right, I thought, okay, now I absolutely know what side I'm on. I don't need the president to tell me, and I hope very few people did. I've since then been to Pakistan, because I thought I'd better have a look. I've been to the Afghan front, because I thought I ought to. I've been to Kashmir, where I think the next war will be if we're not careful about it. And I've come to the following conclusion. Mr. bin Laden made an absolutely horrific mistake when he did what he did. It's horrific in every other sense too, obviously, as I've just said. But what he has done is now called for a holy war against the Jews, against the Christians, against, naturally, the secular world, people like myself, against quite a lot of other Muslims, and now, not many people have noticed this, against Hinduism as well. In other words, he's just made 1 billion enemies in India. Furthermore, by doing what he did, he derailed something that was happening in Pakistan, a very horrible thing that was happening there. Sorry to keep using the word horrible, but I would say, quite soberly, that within a year, maybe less, if the World Trade Center had not been destroyed and the other atrocities in Washington and Pennsylvania had not occurred, the Taliban and its allies, including Al-Qaeda, would have taken over Pakistan. Pakistan was being very rapidly Talibanized through its military oligarchy and the religious parties and Muslim jihad groups it's been sponsoring. They won't get hold of the Pakistani state now. They won't. And they won't get hold of its nuclear weapons, which they were hoping to do. And you hear all the time that there's a lot of Muslim opinion that favors Mr. bin Laden and thinks of him as a hero. But what can he do for them? They can't go and join him in his cave, even if they want to. They can't go back to the 15th century with him or live in the desert with him either. What he demands of them is literally impossible. So there's absolutely no chance that he can win. I mean, you can exclude the possibility of the victory of evil. It cannot happen. And I think we might make some quite good friends in the battle against it. I would particularly recommend making a friend of the secular pluralist democracy of India, which has long been far too low on the United States list of countries to be well connected with. I think look forward very much to cooperating with India and repudiating tribalism, communalism, as the Indians call religious sectarianism. And so, you know, I get up every morning thinking, what can I do today to join the battle for and extend the battle for secular pluralist democracy and to inconvenience and humiliate its foes.
Our guest, Christopher Hitchens, who's also a contributing editor for this publication, Vanity Fair. This is what the December issue looks like. And inside, he writes, For Patriot Dreams, based on what the caller just brought up. We'll get a call from Dublin, Ireland. Go ahead, please.
Hello. I'd like to say to Mr. Hitchens I enjoy his work very much.
That's very kind of you. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I was wondering how you look on Mr. Clinton's, President Clinton's administration being somewhat asleep at the wheel with regard to bin Laden. I mean, it wasn't the first time bin Laden has struck.
No, indeed.
What do you think was his fault?
Well, I can refer you to a chapter in my book about Mr. Clinton, which the book is called No One Left to Lie To, in case you wonder what I think about him in general. What I think about him in particular in this chapter, which is called Clinton's War Crimes, is that he did one of the worst things any president has ever done. He used American cruise missiles in a covert and surreptitious decision that was taken against the advice of most of his Joint Chiefs and his intelligence chiefs and diplomats, ostensibly to bomb a terrorist facility, as they called it, in Sudan, but actually in order to try and fool around with public opinion on the day that Monica Lewinsky was going back to the grand jury. It was, as we say in Washington, a wag the dog moment. He picked a target, excuse me, he picked a target which he knew was not a military facility, that was actually a factory making most of the pharmaceuticals and medicines for Sudan, gravely damaging the fabric of that society. He shot another couple of missiles into what he thought was Afghanistan. In fact, one of them landed in Pakistan, accidentally revealing the connection between the Pakistani army and bin Laden, because the missiles killed a couple of Pakistani officers who had no business being in a bin Laden camp, but were training infiltrators for Kashmir. And having made a complete fool of himself, having been exposed before the United Nations as having hit the wrong target for the wrong reasons, in a shady week where he was trying to avoid impeachment, he dropped the subject of bin Laden altogether. It was a photo op moment for him. It failed. He then went on to basically ignore the whole question, even though a great deal more was accidentally disclosed about this network and what it had in mind for us.
Los Angeles, good morning. I'm sorry.
As with everything else about his presidency, it wasn't just 8 years wasted. It was 8 years we really ought to try and have back. It was the most deplorable presidency possible.
Los Angeles, go ahead, please.
Hi, thanks for taking the call.
Good morning.
I do have a question for Mr. Hitchens, but I'm curious, did you not write a book recently about Henry Kissinger?
I did.
Okay.
Thanks for everyone mentioning all my other books. I'm thrilled. It's called The Trial of Henry Kissinger. It argues that Henry Kissinger can and should be brought within the ambit of law for crimes against humanity and war crimes.
How many books have you written?
In my life? About 12 or so, 12, 13. Actually, it may sound conceited. I don't know. And some of them are pamphlets, really, rather than books. I mean, the full-length proper books, about 3. Collections of essays or short subject books, maybe about another 5 or 6.
Go ahead, caller. Thank you for your patience.
Sure. I guess it's such a huge subject, and there's so many things that one would like to say, and time is so short. But I guess briefly, in answer to Daniel Pipe's question about what could we do for moderates, I think what we could do is pay them. I think it seems worldwide there's this struggle between labor and people in power, and it doesn't really matter what religion, what nationality, what age, what time in human history. It's always there. And when we pay workers well, they're pretty happy and we get along harmoniously. And when we find we can't pay workers well, there's plenty of trouble. And the people in power will do anything and everything, including sending missiles and bombs, to stay in power and to keep things the way they are generally. But my question for Mr. Hitchens is, with all this talk about prosecuting perpetrators of terrorist acts, don't we have a history in this country of writing instruction manuals on terrorism and distributing them in Central America? And if that's true, or if any of these types of things are true, don't we have people in our own country like Oliver North that we should be prosecuting?
Thanks, caller.
Well, it is regrettably true that there was a manual on terrorism and subversion and assassination and all of that was distributed by, not by, let's be fair, not by this country. You can't say the United States did this because Congress was not told about it. So the people who did it thought highly enough of the American people, at least to have the grace to lie to them about this. But it is true that such a manual was circulated and given to criminal elements in Nicaragua with instructions to proceed to try and destroy the society. And it's further true, I believe, and I think I could prove, if challenged, that at the so-called School of the Americas, the training school that the United States government runs for South America and Central America, which has produced people like General Noriega as its graduates, methods of torture and kidnap and assassination and disappearance were inculcated on our dime into these revolting military elites upon which American policies depended for far too long. So yeah, that's undoubtedly true. And the case I make against Henry Kissinger, which is a much broader one than that, is that ever since the arrest of General Pinochet in London, we've entered a new world where there is such a thing, the common phrase for it now, the legal phrase is universal jurisdiction. The war criminal and the, I find the word terrorist a bit vague, but let's use it for now. People like that are defined in law as the common enemies of humanity. They may be arrested and put on trial wherever they are found. And sovereign immunity, the claim that some of them make that, well, what they did as politicians or as legally appointed public servants is false will be struck down by a court. That's not a defense for committing